Hello Stampers, this is Yana Smakula for My Favorite Things. Welcome back for another video tutorial. In this video, I have a wordplay happy birthday card with an adorable Halloween witch featuring the My Favorite Things Sweet Little Spell stamp set. This little cutie is simply adorable. Notice the little cat hiding behind her. The girl is the perfect size for A2 cards, and she is also large enough to create a perfect focal point. I stamped the witch in Memento Tuxedo Black ink, which is a Copic marker-friendly ink, onto some white cardstock using my Mini Misty stamping tool. I double stamped her to get a darker impression. I wanted to create a cute, sweet, friendly witch, so I opted to use slightly different colors, not something you would see on traditionally colored witch. Her face was colored with E000, E00, and E02 markers. So I first applied a solid layer of E000 to her entire face, neck, and hands. Next, I used E00 around the edges of the face to add some shading, and this created roundness. And finally, I used E02 under her hat and her hair to deepen the shadows a little bit. And then I went back to the E000 to blend all of these colors out. So pretty simple color combination for the face. Her hair was colored using brown markers, and I used flick coloring technique. I find this works best for coloring hair. You want to gently flick the color onto the image using just the tip of your marker. So we're not saturating the paper with the ink as we did for her face. So we're not using one color and we're not applying it all over the hair. Instead, we are applying flicks of color to mimic hair strands. I started with the darkest brown, E79, and then I flicked E33, E31, and E37 colors to create darker and lighter areas in her hair, so darker and lighter flicks. I find I like to turn the paper as I color so that my flicks all go in one direction. This makes it a lot easier for me, for my wrist. And I just keep flicking the color until I have the desired effect. I'm not a pro when it comes to Copic coloring, but this technique is quite simple to master and also one that works well for coloring many different things like hair, and it especially works well for flowers and leaves. I used R20 marker to add a little bit of blush to her cheeks, just a dot. As for her cape and hat, I didn't really want to use traditional purple or black colors. Like I said, I wanted to create a good witch, a kind and open-hearted witch. So I decided to use pinks instead. I started with my darkest color, RV34, and I used it to lay down the shadows and create folds in her cape. The image itself doesn't have a lot of stamped detail, leaving the detail work up to you. This way, you can add any kind of texture to the cape using your coloring mediums. I tried to envision areas where her cape would have folds, and I gently flicked those in using my darkest marker. I also added shadows onto her hat and then inside the sleeves. Now, there are some fantastic examples of how this image can be colored, and you can find those on the My Favorite Things website on the product page. Do check it out for more ideas. There's some really great cards and really great coloring examples there. I also like to look up witch illustration ideas on Pinterest for more ideas, for more examples. I find that to be very helpful when I'm not sure how to color something. So if I'm looking for ideas how to color a witch, I would just type witch illustration on Pinterest, or maybe like a witch cartoon on Pinterest, and that gives me lots of different examples. Next, I used the RV11. This is my medium color, and I used it to extend the shadows. I worked the folds and extended those, as well as shaded her hat a little bit. And the next two colors are RV10 and RV00. These are my lightest. I kept working on this image, particularly on her cape, extending the color further in. And lastly, I used the RV00 to fill in the rest of the white. You can also go back to the darkest and medium colors to intensify the shadows and emphasize the folds. I used Y11 and Y21 to color the brush part of the broom and then E79 and E33 to color the handle. So very simple. It's quite a small image, so you can do a lot of blending and shading here. As for her shoes, I used the same colors as I used for her hair, but here I didn't use the flick technique. Instead, I applied the color in a regular way, blending it. So I started with the darkest, E79, next extended that in using E37, next added E33, and finally used E31 to blend all of the colors. So I have a gradual transition from the very dark at the outside of her shoes to the very light, almost white in the center. I also used the same colors to color the cat. Now I didn't want to introduce too many different colors into this image, so I mainly just went with pink and brown. Next, I used a coordinating die and cut the little witch out. She's just adorable. I did some additional stamping and coloring to create additional elements to build my scene. I stamped and colored a few pumpkins and then several leaves, and I used images from the My Favorite Things Autumn Blessings stamp set. I used Y11, Y08, and YR15 colors to color the pumpkins yellow-orange, and for the leaves I used the same pinks as I did for her cape. Speaking of the scene for this card, I heat embossed an adorable sentiment that reads, "Wishing you a happy birthday." So that's where you have the wordplay. You have the little witch, and then the sentiment says, "Wishing you a happy birthday," instead of "wishing you." I used detail white embossing powder, and I heat embossed this onto pearlescent black cardstock. So I didn't want to use regular black cardstock, as that would have been too dark and maybe even a little bit too boring. So I used this pearlescent cardstock instead. It's just something that I have in my stash. If you don't have paper like this, you can always spray regular black cardstock with a shimmer spray, but make sure you do that after you've heat embossed your sentiment so that you do not mess up your embossing. And the sentiment comes from another stamp set from My Favorite Things, the Itty Bitty Boos set. And there are lots of other fun sentiments in that set that are just perfect for Halloween. I heat set the sentiment at the bottom of the panel. This way I had the room above the sentiment to place my scene. And then I used glue to adhere the panel onto an A2 white top folding card base. I had to trim the card base down slightly as I had a little bit of white show on the edges. And with that done, I just foam mounted my images one by one onto my card front, creating my wordplay witch birthday card. I wanted to add a few pumpkins to bring in a little bit of yellow, and I also wanted to add a few leaves to the scene, so I added some that were colored both yellow and pink. These, of course, aren't traditionally colored. Of course, you don't see the pink leaves anywhere, but they work really well for my card design, so that's what I went with. Lastly, I embellished my card using a few pink gems from my stash. I scattered a bunch of the gems on the background, filling the background in a little bit. So here's a look at the finished card. I hope you picked up a few tips and tricks in my video and will give this idea a try yourself. If you do, you guys know the drill. Please share online and tag us on social media. We always love seeing what you're making. Subscribe now and do hit that bell icon not to miss any new card making videos. Thanks so much for watching. Love you guys, and I'll see you next time.